Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. One of the things I appreciate about this new hour that we have that is local is we're able to focus a lot of time and attention on Texas issues, although for the next couple of minutes we'll be talking about issues that are really relevant to all of us nationwide. And probably the way to introduce that is to say that you might remember the last time that we had Frank Gaffney on the program, we spent some time talking about this idea of an electromagnetic pulse. We've talked with him over the years about that. And those of you that have been listening to the program for a long time might even remember a time when we had William Forston on when he came out with his book 1 Second After, which also had an introduction by Newt Gingrich. And it just reminds us of the potential danger if we do not work to actually beef up and protect the nation's energy grid. And so one of the people that's been kind of at the forefront of this, especially in the state of Texas, is State Senator representing the 2nd District, Bob Hall, individual that graduated from the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, also served in the Air Force, later in the aerospace industry, and formed his own company, Professional Proposal Management, has been serving in the Texas Senate for many years and joins us now by phone. Senator Hall, appreciate you being with us today here on Point of View.
Well, Kerby, thank you very much. I appreciate being here with you today to talk about this very important subject.
Well, it is. And any person that's been listening to some of the interviews we've done, certainly with Frank Gaffney and a number of other individuals, or going all the way back to the interview I did, now that goes back 10 years ago, when the book 1 Second After came out. I know you read the book, and that's what got you interested in part of what would happen if, let's take North Korea as an example, were to launch a nuclear missile in the upper atmosphere, explode that, it would send an electromagnetic pulse, destroy our energy grid. And although technically it wouldn't kill people, it would just kill electronics, eventually it would kill people because it would banish us back to maybe the 19th century. And that book is a reminder of what really is at stake. Tell us more.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that book was part of what reignited my interest in this subject. Just so that you and others would know, this was not something new that just came up at that time, but my initial exposure to this threat from our enemies. Actually, my introduction to it was when I was a young captain in the Air Force as an engineer working on the Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missile in the 60s. When we first learned of this threat out of our high altitude nuclear testing that we were doing, that we found that whenever we set off a nuclear weapon above the atmosphere, we were knocking out the power system in the islands. And so we also figured out that could be a weapon, could be weaponized and used by the Russians as something that we would not have much of a counter to, because our missiles would be susceptible to this threat and theirs wouldn't, simply because we were advanced over them in our development, had integrated circuits in our computers for our missile, and the Russians were using vacuum tubes. And so I was the project officer who led the team that designed what we call hardening the Minuteman missile in the late 60s. But it was once I left the Air Force, I really didn't talk about that project that much because it was so highly classified. I never knew that it had become unclassified. And then just a few years ago, I came across an article on the subject, found that some of the men who had worked in the White House on the first EMP commission had actually been some of the same engineers I had worked with when I was in the Air Force that were now concerned about our electrical grid's vulnerability to this threat, that in the 60s we didn't really consider it, the electrical grid, because we knew we were going to be in the midst of a all-out nuclear war, and we had bigger problems than that. But then I met Frank Gaffney by chance, read the book by chance, and then next thing I knew, God had led me to run for office, and met another one of Frank's associates, as you may have had on your program, Dr. Peter Pry, who explained to me that Texas had its own electrical grid system, which I was not aware of at that time.
Yes.
And it suggested if I got elected to office, I ought to do something about trying to protect the Texas grid. So that's what happened, and that's where we are. And now I'm in my third session here with my third bill that I think, with the events that have taken place over the last, since we were last in session, to make people much more aware of the seriousness and the reality of this threat, I think we possibly have a very good chance of getting started with a bill here in Texas that will begin the process of protecting the people of Texas against this almost unthinkable threat. And I say unthinkable because I think you've probably described before that this is something that is a one-time event, needs to happen once, and simply the detonation of a small nuclear weapon about 200 nautical miles above the central part of the United States, which could be put in place by a short-range, medium-range missile, such as an SA-2 launched off of a cargo ship off the coast of Texas, would destroy anything electrical, electronic, not just in Texas, but in the United States, coast to coast, and the destruction would be beyond repair. And so, as Williams' book says, we would be moved back into the 18th century, where we would be essentially without electricity, which means no pumps would run. There would be no running water, no sewer system. There would be no pumps for gas, but cars wouldn't run if they did unless you had a 1974 model or earlier. Generators would probably not even start, but if they happened to start, they would only run as long as they had fuel, because there'd be no way to deliver it. So we've been in a situation where people will live longer without food than they will without electricity, and electricity being the third most important thing to sustaining life. That is, air and water are just ahead of it. We would be in a very bad shape.
Let me just mention we're coming to a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue for a few more minutes with the state senator representing the 2nd District. One of the articles we've posted is from our friends at the Center for Security Policy that came out when 2 years ago the Texas Senate passed a bill that you authored 28-3, and then the House also passed one by Tan Parker. But we'll talk about where that has gone, what needs to take place. And also, maybe when we come back, I might, Senator, ask you to respond to the way in which this has been greeted, which is usually like, well, that is so unlikely. It is just one of those things that probably would never happen. And, of course, you know, when people say that, I say, well, yeah, 100-year storms, but we just had one. Hey, you know, levees breaking down in New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina. Oh, that never happened. Well, it did. And so I want to get into some of the kinds of responses that you've received, because I do believe that this is a very important issue. It's something we've talked about before, and I'm just delighted you can join us today to educate us a little bit more. As he mentioned, of course, he was in the Air Force. He helped develop the Minuteman missile system and worked on hardening it, and has really looked at this for many years. And, of course, now we recognize the potential danger when we simply look at places like North Korea. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the U.S. debt officially reached $20 trillion, some listeners ask who owns this debt. In the past, we were assured that the national debt wasn't a big deal since we owe it to ourselves. I never thought that comment was very reassuring then, and it simply isn't true now. The U.S. borrows heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese, and this creates the first problem: foreign influence. One former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. Foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. Another problem is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit. They have their own economies to deal with and will probably want to put their investments closer to home, especially as they look at the current congressional spending spree. Are we approaching a time when America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? Sometimes the U.S. looks like some of the citizens who have maxed out their credit cards and have nowhere else to turn. The amount some of these countries hold in American debt is staggering. The U.S. government owes China $1.1 trillion. Saudi Arabia probably has about $700 billion in assets. A number of years ago, they threatened to sell that much off when Barack Obama was president. These countries that have been lending America money may not wish to invest any more in America and might even decide to withdraw their current investments. In previous commentaries, I've warned about the possibility that these foreign investors may simply decide to cash in their treasury bills and invest them closer to home. If our creditors cut us off, our treasury securities could reach junk bond status. The lesson here is simple. Before you spend the money, you need to know where it's coming from. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have State Senator Bob Hall on with us for a few more minutes. And, Senator, let's, if we can, just talk about the way in which sometimes this threat is dismissed. We have right now individuals telling us that we need to implement this Green New Deal because since the 1800s, the mean temperature in the world has gone up 0.6 of a degree. There are people at like DEFCON 1 convinced that we only have 12 years left before the entire civilization collapses, which I think is certainly a little bit of hyperbole, to put it mildly. On the other hand, we do have, I think, a more serious threat, and that is North Korea already have the missiles necessary to launch a nuclear device in the upper atmosphere. Iranians and others would like to obtain nuclear devices and missiles. And it seems to me that that's reason enough. But let me add a second one that you might want to address, and that is we've had some pretty bizarre weather patterns in the past. Back in the 19th century, some of those weather patterns knocked out telegraph lines. So whether it's done intentionally by a terrorist or accidentally, if you will, by the weather, I think our energy grid is a lot more vulnerable than many people really want to give us credit for.
Oh, absolutely right, Kerby. You're so true, and because it's both man-made and natural, and the natural is not a theory. It has actually happened. The incident you're referring to occurred in 1859, and we have hard evidence that it destroyed our telegraph system, which is the only thing electrical we had at that time. It's called a Carrington event, and it happened coast to coast here and in Europe, that it burned up the telegraph system, sent operators to the office, set railroad ties on fire, and was so intense that it warped rail tracks like pretzels. And then again, just a few years back, we had the event in the northeast part of the United States where we had the power knocked out in the Northeast and in Canada. It was about a $20 billion worth of damage.
And I was in New York at the time, so I remember that vividly.
So it's very real. I mean, it's just as real as an automobile wreck.
Yes.
And just think about how people used to feel about the inconvenience, the unnecessary expense, and the intrusion on personal liberty to require a seatbelt to be worn. And today, people accept that. No one gets in your car and say, I'm going to go have a wreck today, but it's there in case you need it. But here we have this threat against our country that is, it's not just that they have the capability. We absolutely know that the Russians have it in their toolbox, because when the Soviet Union fell, the defectors that came here told us that that was part of their plan, and that they knew the Chinese had it in their plan because they'd helped them develop it. We have heard Kim Jong of North Korea on dozens of speeches say, threaten the United States. And I'll tell you that those missile launches that he was doing were on trajectories that were specifically designed to deliver an EMP weapon, not an intercontinental ground strike. And so we have him, we have the Iranians who have threatened it, and I cannot discount the fact that there is a great possibility that they already possess a nuclear weapon. We have witnessed them practicing launching missiles off of the back of a cargo ship, just like they would do off of Texas if they were to attack us in the Indian Ocean. We intercepted a North Korean freighter a few years back coming through the Panama Canal that had 2 SA-2 missiles on it and all the equipment needed to launch that missile, and we were managed to intercept it. We know the North Koreans have 2 weapons-grade satellites crossing the United States multiple times a day that very well could be armed with a nuclear weapon used as an EMP attack. So it is out there, and people have talked about it. It's no secret. They don't keep it a secret because they know it is the one thing that could be done that is easy, quick, and would have the most devastating impact, because many people cannot hardly imagine our country living without electricity, because we would not live very long.
I would agree. Let's, if we can, since we have lots of activists, Senator Hall, talk about what people can do. That is, you're more encouraged in this session that this might pass, but are there action items that you might want to give to some of our listeners when we relate to this idea of protecting at least the Texas energy grid?
Absolutely. Number one, call your power company. If the leaders in our country in the 1940s had the character or level of character and courage that our leaders in the power industry and in Congress have today, half our country would be speaking Japanese today and the other half would be speaking German. They need to call their power company and demand that they start taking action to protect the grid. We need our electrical infrastructure to be resilient. We've got a program, we've got a bill that will do just this. And what we need is to work together. We need to move beyond having the power companies opposing any and everything that we're doing to try to protect the people of Texas. Matter of fact, if you go back to the 1930s, if we'd have been left up to the power companies today, we would not have any electricity in rural Texas. It took the government stepping in to force the power companies to go into the rural areas because they were more concerned, just like they are today, with profits and bonuses than they are about what's doing the right thing for the people of Texas.
Again, people can go to your website. It's senate.texas.gov. And, of course, you can find, we have a link there to Senator Bob Hall, District 2. And so that is one action item. But real quickly, how we doing on other issues that we oftentimes talk with state senators and state representatives about? In particular, one of the issues I hear about almost every day is property tax reform. Any possibility in this legislative session?
Probably the best chance we've had in an awful long time, because we're actually addressing it. We have gotten a bill out of the Senate that is reform. It is not property tax relief, but it will help slow down the growth of local taxes and it will be done in a way that will not hurt the ability of local governments to provide goods and services, even though the local officials will say it does not, because it simply allows the people in the community, if they want to spend the money that go beyond a 2.5% growth, all they have to do is vote for it, and they get to do it. And so this puts it's the ultimate in local control, because it puts it back in the hands of the people to decide, do they want their taxes to increase or don't they, rather than being at the mercy of their local elected officials to raise it without their concurrence.
And again, one of the things I think is so encouraging is to see what's happened in the House. Senator Hall, I've many times said that a good legislation in the Texas Senate goes to the Texas House to die because of the former Speaker of the House. But you have a different Speaker there now, so it does seem to me that some of that good legislation that you in the Texas Senate have been able to pass, with, of course, the help of the Lieutenant Governor, might actually get a hearing and might actually get somewhere in the Texas House, don't you think?
You're absolutely right. The really good thing that I've seen is we have three leaders that our governor, our lieutenant governor, and our Speaker of the House, who have come together to lead in the same direction. They have laid out the top priorities as they see them. As you understand, the legislature is supposed to be in control of what happens. But you have the leadership, and they've laid out a program of the things that the people of Texas have said are the most important to them that we can do something about. School finance, property tax reform, teacher pay, school safety are all at the top of the list, and you have the Senate is pulling in the same direction. The first two bills we've passed out along this line have been unanimous, bipartisan support. We've got more coming. So we're seeing, and I see and feel a unanimity in the House that I have not seen since I've been here, that gives me great hope that we will be able to get some of these conservative issues that make life better for the people of Texas actually passed this time.
Very good. Well, Senator Hall, appreciate you being on the program with us. Look forward to the next opportunity. And again, if you would like to know more about this, we have an article that came out 2 years ago from the Center for Security Policy. We have a link to Senator Bob Hall's website, and we encourage you to get involved. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you very much, and God bless you.
We need to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to spend a little bit of time, first of all, looking through and talking about this wonderful article that came out by David French called The Two-Faith Nation, and I think it really makes the case for why we so often here on the program spend time talking about this issue of religious liberty, and also kind of gives us a sobering look at where the country is headed. Then we'll get into a couple of other issues, then Dr. Paul Barreca is going to be in studio with us next hour. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about our trip to Israel and Rome, but then also get into some other issues that we love to talk about. And so we've got lots to cover, but we need to take a break. So if you'd like to find out a little bit more about some of the issues we're talking about today, visit the website, pointofview.net. Stay tuned. We'll have more right after this.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Did want you to know a little bit about this idea of an electromagnetic pulse, about protecting the energy grid in the state of Texas. Really, we need to do this nationwide, but maybe Texas needs to lead. And it is kind of intriguing because, as Senator Hall points out, most people are unaware of the fact that you have a number of energy grids across the country, but Texas essentially has its own. It doesn't perfectly fit the outline of the state, but pretty close. which means that in some respects, even if there was an electromagnetic pulse over, say, New England, the United States might be affected in more ways than, say, the state of Texas is. But by contrast, as he said, if there was a freighter outside of the Gulf of Mexico that launched one of those, then we would be vulnerable. And this is why I appreciate the fact that he's taking the lead on an issue that I think is a lot more significant than many people give him credit for. So we wanted to cover that. We will cover it again in the future. And let me, if I can, encourage you to go to the website, because the first article I want to talk about is the Two Faith Nation. But again, as a program note, let me just mention Dr. Paul Barreca is going to be in studio with us in about a half an hour. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about our trip to Israel and Rome this year. As you may remember, we've gone to Israel in the past. We've gone to Israel and Greece. This time it's Israel and Rome. Pretty much filling up the first bus, but we will have 2 buses. So if you still are interested, that is available. I'm going to even have a few people that have participated in the past trips for just a few minutes before we get on to some other issues about missions and archaeology and all the other things that Dr. Paul Barreca and I like to talk about. But let me for a minute point you to this particular article. It's the first one listed on our website, called The Two Faith Nation. It is written by David French. David French was in studio with us a while back. He writes for the National Review and is an individual that comes with a legal background and for many years has really been dealing with these religious liberty issues. And as we are reading through this, we might just mention that Jack Phillips, who is the baker in Colorado, whose case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and essentially he won. It didn't win exactly. What they did was say, well, the animus was so terrible from the Colorado Human Rights Commission that they set it aside. But then very quickly there was an attempt to try to catch him on a transgender issue, which now, as of yesterday, has been set aside as well. And I think the battle over Jack Phillips as the baker, the battle over Aaron and Melissa Klein, which is one of the clients of First Liberty, again, bakers or some of the individuals that have been florists, photographers, and others, kind of bring us back to this issue by David French. He said, I'm old enough to remember when religious liberty lawyers were a quirky, somewhat cool, and tiny, very tiny subset of the legal profession. They were the guys who skipped out on the law firm bucks and instead spent their days making sure that the faithful folks on the fringes of American life didn't get a raw deal. They kept the dominant American cultural Christians honest. Did a Native American group need the liberty to build a sweat lodge? Was a quirky homeschool family getting harassed by state education officials? Did a Sikh need help to keep his dagger? In each case, the Religious Liberties Bar was there to help with broad public approval. But then what he talks about, the fact is that when it came time to pass what was called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, there you saw, again, how everybody was in pretty much agreement because it only passed with 3 dissenting votes. It was introduced in the House by then Representative Chuck Schumer, was introduced in the Senate by then Senator Ted Kennedy, and President Bill Clinton signed it without great fanfare. So I think it just helps us understand, you go back about a quarter of a century, religious liberty was something we dealt with because it affected the Moonies, it affected the Sikhs, it affected maybe some Jewish group. And the point he's making is that has all changed. Because he said in the early 1990s, you could almost fit the entire Religious Liberties Bar in a single mid-sized hotel conference room. Now conservative religious liberty lawyers are the virtual SEAL Team 6 of the culture war. I love that. I sent this to Kelly Shackelford the other day, and he wrote back and said, yeah, we're the SEAL team. Amen. Which we'll talk more about maybe on Friday. With multiple organizations raising collectively close to $200 million annually to do battle in the courtrooms from coast to coast. You have, of course, he doesn't mention these, but Alliance Defending Freedom, which just won 2 cases before the Supreme Court last year. You have First Liberty, which just argued their case a week ago, and many other issues. Of course, you have Liberty Counsel and a variety of other groups as well. And so now back to the point. David French says, what changed? Well, America changed from a largely single-faith culture to a two-faith nation, sacred and secular. It will be a two-faith nation for the foreseeable future. That's why religious liberties are so controversial. That's why there'll be a flashpoint in the elections of 2020 and 2024. No longer is a Christian nation urged to protect the small and politically insignificant faiths in its midst. In 1993, there was no real perceived public cost to basic religious tolerance. He's talking back to, of course, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. But now the Sunnis are asked to tolerate the Shiites. He's using that as a metaphor, of course. The Hindus are asked to tolerate the Muslims. And in the zero-sum game of a two-faith power struggle, when one faith wins, the other takes a loss. In an invaluable piece in the New York Times, Ross Douthat, who's been on the program with us before, makes an important point, he says, about American politics. While Democrats are divided between left and center-left on a broad range of policies when it comes to the culture war, there is no meaningful center-left. Here's what he says. The story of the Democrat struggles over the last 15 years is a story of a party that has consistently moved leftward faster than the also changing country and consistently overreads victories on same-sex marriage above all as the template for how every cultural battle should play out. It's a story of a new feminism that's pushed the party even further from the center on abortion, of a new cohort of white liberals who are actually to the left of many African Americans on racial issues, of an activist base that brands positions that many liberals held only yesterday as not only mistaken, but bigoted or racist or beyond the pale. I think we need to get Ross back on here to talk about that, because I agree. You know, there are positions being held now by the so-called mainstream leaders in the Democrat Party that are different than the Democrat Party stands just even a half a decade ago, certainly a decade ago. And the whole argument was, could Bill Clinton even win in this current climate of the Democrat Party? Well, David French uses a different example. He says, let's look at Hillary Clinton. He said, I wrote not long ago that if the 2016 version of Hillary ran in 2020, she'd anchor the far-right wing of the Democrat Party. Her health, climate, and foreign policies are all well to the right of the Democrats today. Not on cultural issues. On cultural issues, she's in lockstep with the white progressive left, dismissive of religious liberty, fully on board with the Obama administration's gender identity initiatives, and even seeking public funding of abortions. But again, Ross, writing in the New York Times, calls this modern liberalism a pseudo-church. Increasingly, however, we can drop the pseudo. As Andrew Sullivan, who, by the way, is a very prominent homosexual, but nevertheless, and many others have been arguing for some time, the language as well as even the kinds of policies being taken in are, again, almost like a church. But he says the secular nature of this religion leads many progressives to believe that it can fully inhabit government, the academy, and corporate America without constitutional or legal consequence. True enough, under American law, you can preach every aspect of social justice faith from the government pulpit in a way that you can't preach the divinity of Christ. But social justice cannot crowd religion from the public square. So he says, identifying intersectionality, that's the idea of individuals that have different kinds of victimology, and a secular focus on social justice as fundamentally religious impulses help us identify the magnitude of the national polarization. Our adoption of these religious impulses, even to the center left, helps us understand why the stakes of our political contest always seem to rise. He says this is a sobering idea because, let's face facts, present world realities and enduring examples from history teach us that true two-faith nations often struggle mightily to maintain social peace and political cohesion absent extraordinary efforts to maintain unity and community. He says tolerance is easy when tolerance doesn't threat your power. A nation secure in its identity can and should unite to protect marginalized and politically weak religious voices. And in 1993, it did exactly that. But a nation torn by religious division, by contrast, will view each advance by a religious foe as a material defeat of religious friends. Unless we can break that paradigm, look for America to divide even more than we've seen before. And if nothing else, David French is, I think, onto something. It illustrates why we spend more time every single year, it seems, talking about religious liberty, because we have become a two-faith nation. and it's become even more important to defend religious liberty. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me just spend just a few minutes, if I could, talking about my commentary today, the one tomorrow, and maybe some other issues that might be helpful. Let me just mention that my Viewpoints commentary is available to you every single day. As you go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll see a little red bar there that says sign up. And if you've never signed up to receive my commentary, and it's amazing how many people I've run into that say, "You write a daily Viewpoints commentary?" Well, yes, I do. Oh, yeah, I guess I've heard it occasionally. I'd love to get it. Well, you can sign up. It's free. We send mine Monday through Friday, and then Penna Dexter does a weekly commentary, which shows up on Saturday. And so it's free. It comes to your inbox. And so if you've never signed up, let me encourage you to do so. My commentary today has to do with borrowed money. And the reason I used it is back about a year ago when the United States debt officially reached $20 trillion. Now it's $21 trillion. Some listeners were asking, well, who owns the debt? And we get those calls every once in a while. And I remember when we first started talking about the national debt in the 1980s, which at that time was $1 trillion. By the time Ronald Reagan left office, it was getting close to $2 trillion. Hard to believe, isn't it? But nevertheless, people were saying, well, it's not a big deal because we owe it to ourselves. First of all, I never thought that that was very reassuring because, okay, if you buy savings bonds or T-bills, it's still got to be paid back. So this idea that you owe it to yourselves was never very reassuring to me, but it's certainly not true now. In my commentary, I point out that we borrow heavily from other countries, especially the Chinese. And I want to come back to that in just a minute because, first of all, that gets us back to foreign influence. We've been talking about what about the foreign influence in the last presidential election because of the Russians? Well, Robert Mueller's going to have his report come out. I think we're going to find out there wasn't as much as everybody said, but still, you can begin to think about this because one former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune, and foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. And you can see how if Chinese were upset with Donald Trump, just about the time the elections are coming, they could decide to cash in all of that, crash the market, and guarantee that he would lose. I mean, that's how much influence now other countries have on us economically. And of course, even if they don't want to do that, because in some respects, that's not necessarily going to happen because the Chinese need us as much as we need them because we're buying their goods, but they, need the markets and all those kinds of things. But there's another problem that I talk about in my commentary, and that is these countries don't have an infinite source of credit. Some of them are really struggling with this. They have their own economies to deal with. They probably put their investments where they need to, and they may want to put more of their investments closer to home rather than overseas. So you can see that this could be a real problem. And so are we actually approaching a time in which America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? And it seems, as I will talk about tomorrow in a commentary that's coming out, we are finding where a lot of Americans have sort of maxed out their credit cards. Are we getting to the point where the United States has sort of maxed out its credit card? Maybe not yet, but it's still kind of concerning. If you look at the numbers, and these are what's on the books, and I found now that there are some things off the books, but okay, we'll just talk about what's on the books. The United States government owes China more than $1 trillion. It owes Saudi Arabia pretty close to about 3/4 of $1 trillion. You have all sorts of issues there. You might even remember when Barack Obama was the president, Saudi Arabia was threatening to sell some of that off because if they disagree with some of your foreign policy, they can, again, control that. And so the point I make in my commentary is that these countries have been lending America money, and they may not wish to invest anymore in the United States. They may decide to withdraw their current investments, or they may no longer want to buy the debt. That's going to have some situations. And so if foreign investors decide to cash in their T-bills, their treasury bills, and invest them closer to home, you can see the possible implications. So it gets us into this issue of debt. And as a preview for tomorrow, I also spend some time talking about another kind of debt. Just about the time we point our fingers at the United States government and said, I can't believe you got us so much into debt. Of course, we're the ones that allow that to take place. We can't say that with too much credibility because, again, we have just a tremendous amount of evidence that we are in, as individuals, a great deal of debt. This particular one is where I spend some time looking at things other than credit card debt, although I'm going to have a commentary coming out pretty soon here talking about that. But there are all sorts of other debts as well. For example, housing-related debt is down about $1 trillion, in part because we've come over the hump of what was happening in 2008. But auto loan debt is at $367 billion higher. And, of course, the big issue for young people is student loan debt, which are $671 billion higher as well. So when you start looking at this, you begin to recognize that we're going to have to see some economic dislocations sooner or later, especially as interest rates go up. And in the past, I've talked about the student loan debt, but even just focusing on something like auto loan debt, you say, well, yeah, everybody has to borrow money to buy a car. But again, there are struggling with the fact that you're going to have higher and higher interest rates, most likely, based upon the Federal Reserve, and millions of these loans are already in delinquency. That's something I'm going to write about in a future commentary because when there are so many in delinquency, you recognize that they're repossessing cars and all sorts of things. And if nothing else, it kind of brings us back to something I wrote about in my book, Making the Most of Your Money in Tough Times, or also have it in the new book, Christians and Economics. Because when you go to the scriptures, it does warn about debt, doesn't it? Proverbs 22:7 says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is a servant to the lender." Some of the translations, I think, more accurately render that the borrower is a slave to the lender. And we have Americans that are very much enslaved with debt. So again, this is a little bit of a look at some of the economic issues that we have addressed. And that is the commentary today on borrowed money, and the commentary tomorrow, which again is on the issue of personal debt as well. By the way, if you did sign up for the commentary, you know that yesterday my commentary was on millennial trends. And, of course, Nick Pitts was sitting in this chair and actually doing the program. And from time to time, we do like to talk about what is happening with the millennial generation. My commentary there kind of takes some time looking at some of these remarkable changes in terms of education, in terms of debt, but also in terms of the desire to stay with their parents longer, in part because of debt, and also the fact that they're marrying later. So, again, if you find yourself saying, I'd like some of those facts and figures, some of the things you've just mentioned, you can go to the website, pointofview.net. First of all, you can sign up to receive those, but you might say, well, I want to see if you have actually provided some facts and figures for other issues that I maybe want to write about, a letter to the editor or a Facebook post. Simply go to that button that says See More Viewpoints, and there's a search engine, and you can go and see what kinds of things that I've been writing about. These commentaries I've been writing for 10 years, so there's quite a bit of material, and I put it out there free of charge for you to use and to make the case. When we come back, you might notice our banner today says Go to Israel with Kerby, and we're going to have Dr. Paul Barreca in studio. Spend just a little bit of time talking about that trip to Israel and to Rome. And then we're going to get into some of these issues of theology and apologetics, which I think you will appreciate as well. Our latest book on archaeology is something we're going to be spending some time talking about. And also, of course, since he heads up a mission agency, we'll be talking about what's happening in the area of world missions. And we'll also have a chance to hear from a few individuals that have been on past trips that want to talk a little bit about what has taken place. So all of that is available on our website today, pointofview.net. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, if you don't already receive the Viewpoints commentary in your inbox, sign up, and we're glad to send it to you. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The leader looked around the table, motioning to the older men. He said, "You're here to remind us how faithful God has been in the past. Now, you middle-aged guys, you keep us focused on what God is doing right now. Make sure we don't stop. And you younger guys, keep us looking forward. Imagine what God wants us to be doing in the years to come." There's a lot of wisdom there. We have to be thankful for the past, focused on the present, and mindful to plan for a great future. Many listeners have made bold moves to partner with Point of View Radio and accomplish great things for more than 45 years. But as we look around, we do see many positive things, and I think we can all admit there's a lot more to be done. It's time to think about your next bold move, what you can do to invest for our nation's future. Be thinking about that. If you have an answer now, don't wait. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information. about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. We're going to spend some time in this first hour talking briefly about this trip that we're going to be taking, as we oftentimes do, this case to Israel and to Rome. And the reason we have that is we have in studio with us today an individual who's been on this program a number of times before, Dr. Paul Barreca, who is the director of Fellowship International Mission and also is a graduate of Word of Life Bible Institute, has his Doctor of Ministry. And Dr. Paul Barreca is a good friend. Also, of course, we've talked about his book, Follow the Master, a Discipleship course for growing Christians, and we're just good buddies, and we've gone to Israel together a couple of times, haven't we?
We have. It's been what a life-changing experience that is, and I'm so glad we get to talk about that today, because there's so much in the news about Israel, but also so much going on in the world of archaeology. We'll get into maybe some of those new discoveries that just really excite our faith and give credibility to scriptures.
I might just mention, those of you that are donors, you may have received our little booklet on a biblical view of archaeology. And so we're going to pull a little bit from that, but also there's this new article that it came out with Bible Study Magazine from our friends at Logos Software that have done some things on archaeology and Bible study. So we're going to get into that as well. But this, Paul, as you know, is something we're going to try as an experiment. And that is, when we do talk about Israel, we talk about it for a couple of minutes and then we move on, obviously, because we have other things to cover. But this time we've decided to do something different. We've brought in a few individuals into the studio that actually were on the trip with us. So if you would like to know, as a matter of fact, some of the pictures, it's kind of like a travelogue, go to the website, pointofview.net. You'll have Kerby and Paul's previous trips, and you'll get a chance to see the pictures of some of the people we're talking about. And, of course, if you're watching online, you can watch those as well. One of those individuals we invited into the program for just a few minutes is Carolyn Sundstrom, a good family friend for a long time. And Carolyn, you and Ron are one of the pictures we have posted here, and you had a chance to go on the trip with us. I know you've been on a number of trips, but what was your reaction of going to Israel with us?
Well, this was probably the best trip we've ever taken, and we've been all over Europe and other places in the world, but this was by far the best trip we've ever taken. And just would encourage anybody that's thinking about going to sign up and come along with us. In fact, we enjoyed it so much, we're going to go back in October. And I've talked about it with a lot of our friends and just told them how great it was. And several of them are coming with us. So
well, I think that's
I'm very
great.
excited.
And Paul, you saw some of the people that are associated with the Sunstroms here that are coming. So nothing better than word of mouth, right?
No, nothing better. And it is, it's a life-changing experience. And my experience the first time I went to Israel was I had heard so many who had gone to Israel. And I thought, well, okay, great. You can read about this stuff and archaeological finds, but being there and seeing the things yourself, it just changes your perspective on your Bible study, doesn't it?
It does, for a fact. And that's what I enjoyed so much. Of all this, every day we'd go to a different site, and either you or Kerby would open the Word of God and teach from the Bible what we were seeing, and it just brought the Bible to life. And we had Bible studies in the evenings after we had dinner, and it was just a great time of fellowship and of Bible study. But one of the highlights for me was being baptized in the Jordan River. I just, I can't say enough good things about that. And my husband and I both made the decision to be baptized in the same river Jesus was baptized. And so that was a special highlight for us. And I just can't say enough good things. And then also visiting the site of the crucifixion of our Lord and seeing the empty tomb and having the Lord's Supper, sharing the Lord's Supper there. It was so meaningful to me and my husband. And I want to go back, and I want to deepen, I want to refresh my memory and see these sites again.
And then get to Rome and see some that you've never seen before.
Yes.
So just incredible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me, if I can, go to someone else, Paul, and that is the question that some people have in their minds is this just a bunch of old fogies driving around here? So I am bringing, for the first and maybe
now,
only
now you
time,
and me not included,
not
of course.
included.
Right.
But I'm bringing in my daughter, Amy, and I don't think Amy's ever been on radio with me before, but Amy, if nothing else, it just illustrates that young people can have some fun because you went with Paul and climbed up Masada. You went around the ramparts of Jerusalem. Talk about, as a kid or a younger person, how this was really meaningful for you as well.
I think it's so much fun because it's like your bucket list. You start to, I was thinking of all the different things that I did in the course of several days. And, we swam in the Dead Sea. So you literally go to the lowest point on earth. And that's really fun. And it's also like a spa experience, which is really fun. And then we were climbing up Masada. And, our group after a while was kind of in different groups. And at one point, I was with these two young men that were in their 20s. One was an Army guy from Australia, another one from Israel. And they were just kind of gallivanting all around the world with their backpacks on them. And of course, we were walking up together. And so they slowed down so that I could be with them. But we had so much fun going to the top and sharing experiences. And I got to ride on a camel, and that's always fun. We did go on the Ramparts walk, and it was actually a little treacherous. So if you don't know, Jerusalem has a wall that goes all around it. On the top of the wall, you can actually walk. And really, a lot of it was more for soldiers. It was more for protection back in the day. And so to have an opportunity to be walking on that was really amazing. You really feel like you were a soldier on the top of some sort of castle. And it was really high, and it was raining, and it was slippery. And there were moments where I wasn't even sure how safe it truly was. But, for someone that's young and wants excitement and adventure, it was absolutely perfect. And, I got to see a 400-year-old olive tree, got to see how olive oil was made. You start to add up some of these experiences. It's amazing because Israel has it's almost like California, where there's desert and there's mountains and there's lush agriculture areas. And there is, again, like I said, there's the Dead Sea. There's just all these different elements in different areas. And so it's really unique because you really do see the Bible come alive, because you'll hear, Jesus was in the Sea of Galilee. Well, I know what that looks like now, in Capernaum when they were, doing different things. I know what that looks like. It was like you start to get these visualizations of different parts of the country, different cities. So it's almost like if I said to you, well, Jesus went to Los Angeles, and then he went to Boston, and then he went to Santa Fe. As an American, you have an idea of what that looks like. And so now I have that kind of visualization when I'm reading the Bible, and it's just amazing. It's more real to me.
Well, and again, that's kind of the testimony that you had, Paul. You said, well, look, I've been to Bible school, and I've taught, and I've been a pastor, but somehow when you read the Bible and you've not been to Israel, it's like in black and white. And then when you go to Israel, it's like in color, isn't it?
It is. And for our audience, that's kind of how these trips got started. You came to New Jersey to preach at Faith Bible Church, and we had just returned from Israel. And so we were gung-ho and had experienced that. And we said, Kerby, we got to go to Israel. And, of course, we put a tour together in 2014 and then another one in 2016. So it is a great privilege. And, of course, we're trying to do this in a way that most folks can afford it. At least the folks that can travel, if that is in your budget. I can just say it sure beats Disney World. So
for sure. We still have one more person to talk to before, of course, you and I get into all sorts of issues. So we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the U.S. debt officially reached $20 trillion, some listeners ask who owns this debt. In the past, we were assured that the national debt wasn't a big deal since we owe it to ourselves. I never thought that comment was very reassuring then, and it simply isn't true now. The U.S. borrows heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese, and this creates the first problem: foreign influence. One former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. Foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. Another problem is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit. They have their own economies to deal with and will probably want to put their investments closer to home, especially as they look at the current congressional spending spree. Are we approaching a time when America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? Sometimes the U.S. looks like some of the citizens who have maxed out their credit cards and have nowhere else to turn. The amount some of these countries hold in American debt is staggering. The U.S. government owes China $1.1 trillion. Saudi Arabia probably has about $700 billion in assets. A number of years ago, they threatened to sell that much off when Barack Obama was president. These countries that have been lending America money may not wish to invest anymore in America and might even decide to withdraw their current investments. In previous commentaries, I've warned about the possibility that these foreign investors may simply decide to cash in their treasury bills and invest them closer to home. If our creditors cut us off, our treasury securities could reach junk bond status. The lesson here is simple. Before you spend the money, you need to know where it's coming from. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And once again, let me just mention that we have in studio with us Dr. Paul Barreca. We're going to get into some of the issues of archaeology and how to really defend the Christian faith. And this has really been a boom year for archaeology. Christianity Today had a very significant article on all the significant finds in 2018. Now, to be fair, some of those were not found in 2018, but they were discovered because lots of times they pull them in, and then as they're sorting through, they find some. So in addition to what they found and those which now, because of new technologies, they've been able to read, this last year has been really exciting in archaeology. And of course, when we make our tour of Israel, we'll try to cover a few of those, won't we?
We're going to see some of those in some new places we haven't visited before. So repeat visitors. And we do have some folks like Carolyn that have been on a tour before and they want to come back because there really is so much. You could spend, well, you could get a university degree and spend all of your time in the land of Israel, and some students do that. But there is so much to see and so many new sites to explore.
Well, let me just go to one more individual, and I've already introduced my daughter. Now let me introduce my wife. Suzanne, I don't think has ever been on the program either, but I thought it would be good just for a few more minutes to talk about this trip to Israel. And Suzanne, if nothing else, you, of course, have been with me on the previous two trips, but what would you want our listeners to know about?
Well, I was just going to share that one of the fun things that we do is we go to a kibbutz. And since I was in high school, I've heard about these kibbutzes in Israel, and I thought that would be so cool. And so we would go and we spend 2 nights there, and we get their morning buffet, we get their evening buffet, and then we're still running around, but we're on the Sea of Galilee. It's just beautiful. You just picture Jesus walking around that kibbutz. I mean, you just really picture him just being right there with you. And so that's really one of the highlights to me. We go to a wonderful Christian camp called Pine Cove. We've always said it's kind of like having Pine Cove be at the kibbutz and being there in Israel. And so we've always just loved that part of it. And so it's very different from staying in your hotel, which we normally are in Israel, but it's very, very special. So that's one of the fun things that we do. But one thing I would like to encourage people is if you're really thinking about going, I would really highly encourage you to do it. These are hard trips to get on. We were talking earlier this year to Steve Fiddler, who's from Pilgrim Travel, who organizes our tours. And he was saying the company's been it's been going since 1987. And he says, we have never found it so hard to get these tours to come together because so many groups now are coming to Israel. He said people now, even from Asia, all over Asia are coming. And that's kind of a new thing for them. So he said, it's hard to get these trips booked. It's hard to get the tour guides. It's hard to get the buses. It's hard to get the planes. It's hard to get the hotels. So these things are selling out fast. And I truly think we will have a waiting list. And if we have a waiting list, you don't want to be on the waiting list. You want to be already with your deposit down. And so I just encourage people, if you want to go and you're serious about going, just put in your deposit. It's $300 and you will have your own seat. You'll have your bus seat. You'll have your hotel. You'll have your plane. And again, we have 80 seats. So once they're gone, they're gone. And we would love to have you join us. So that to me is a fun thing. We have one friend that's going this time. That's one of Carolyn's friends. And we're so excited she's coming. And she says, I have literally tried for 5 years to get on a tour. She said, every time I find out they're already just sold out or it's a time that there's no way I could go. And so like 6 months ahead, she was saying, I want to come on your tour. And we said, okay, great. And so this fall, she was saying, okay, are you already sold out? I said, no, we haven't even started yet. And she was the first person on our list, of the 80 people. She's number one on the list. But she's so excited. And so we're so excited she and her husband are coming. And so that would be my encouragement is if you want to come, just do it. $300 deposit will hold your seat. And it will also give you your spot. But if you have to back out, if you do it within the time that you can back out, you get $200 back. So basically you're having $100 ride on a $5,000 trip.
To hold your seat, yeah.
To hold your seat, which is amazing. And we have the best price out there. You can check all over. Nobody touches our price. So we have a great deal.
Well, Suzanne, you're not excited about this at all, are you? The one thing to validate what you're saying is that the other two trips that we did and a previous trip that I had done back in 2011, it was only the few weeks before the registration deadline that most of the registrations came in. We're almost half full now, so they will most likely they will sell out. And Suzanne, we had to start about a year ago in order to get this tour. The time frame for planning for a trip to Israel is now about 18 months at a minimum. And so we've
amazing.
Been able to do the work, and so our listeners can join in and reap the benefits of all of that.
We're going to get into some other issues, but let me just give you some points that you can find. First of all, if you go to pointofview.net, you'll see the banner says Go to Israel with Kerby. Or if you click through there, you'll see we have one Kerby and Paul's previous trips, and it'll have pictures of all the individuals around the table here from the two different trips. Gives you a little bit of a feel. Also, of course, there's a way in which you can register, but again, if you even contact us here at Point of View, we can send you one of these brochures that give you that information. And Paul, I think it is fair to say, because we've had other people say to us, this is much lower expense, partially because we don't bring this big entourage, and we stay in a kibbutz, which is kind of like staying at a Christian camp. And so we've been able to do this in a way that I think ministers to some of our listeners, because I've had some people say, I'd love to go to Israel, but I just don't know if I can afford it. And we've tried to make it as inexpensive as possible.
That's right. Of course, it still is something that not everyone can afford, and we understand that. And one of the benefits that we've tried to do is make some videos. And if you go to my YouTube page, you can just YouTube my name. There's not too many Paul Barrecas out there, so I've got an unusual last name. But so you'll find some videos of Kerby and myself teaching in Israel. And even if you're not able to go, you can do that. But yes, we've tried to price this so that it's just accessible to as many people as possible, because there really is a spiritual blessing that you'll get by taking part of that, and the friendships. And we've seen that from doing something like this and studying the Bible together and getting to know people from all across the country is really it really is a life-changing experience, and we're just thankful that we can take part in it.
And you had something happen that was kind of unexpected. We had somebody had just a health issue, so you had to take her to a hospital, and she was fine. But then you were saying, I'm here in Magdala. They just did some archaeological investigation. You remember Mary Magdalene? Well, you actually got to see something that maybe this next time we'll get a chance to see as well.
That's right. In 2009, there was some building going on for a Christian conference center, and in the building process, as often happens in Israel, they uncovered what looked like some archaeological things. And, of course, all the work stops and the special archaeological crew comes in, and they kept digging and digging and digging, and they discovered a first-century synagogue in Magdala, which is important because Jesus preached in the area of Galilee.
Yes.
And, of course, we have Mary Magdalene, who was from there. So even though Scripture doesn't put Jesus in this synagogue, it is fairly good guess to say that Jesus was indeed at this synagogue. And there was much discovered there in terms of the Roman occupation, and there were actually they discovered the way that the rocks were built up in the synagogue looked to be like a defensive position against the Romans, and so all of these great things. And so, yeah, there's another entirely new, well, fairly new, the past 6 or 7 years, new archaeological site with new information about Scripture, and we'll talk about some of those perhaps in our next segment as well. But even now, we've read about things, and there are documentations and books written about archaeology, but it's still happening even today.
It is. And again, this has been one of the most exciting times for archaeology, in large part because there is relative peace in that area. When we come back from the break, I'm going to talk about some of these finds that were near the Israeli-Syrian border. Well, if you've ever been to Golan Heights, you understand why with rockets flying over, you're probably not going there. Tel Lachish is down there in the southern part, and with Gaza rockets, you're not going to do a lot of archaeological digging there. So this has been a boom year for archaeology. So we're going to come back and talk about that a little bit. And if nothing else, I think it will cause you, even if you can't go to Israel, to read a little bit more about this, because every single day it seems like we get further confirmation of the historical accuracy of the Scriptures. So we're going to take a break. If you find yourself saying, well, I want to learn more about archaeology, of course, we have our booklet, A Biblical Point of View on Archaeology. We have some of these articles that we have posted in the past, which you can find, including a commentary that I have done, a Viewpoints commentary. But most importantly, as Suzanne said just a minute ago, if you're interested, click on that banner that says Go to Israel with Kerby. When you go there, it will give you the itinerary, the costs, and all the basic questions that you might have. And if you still have questions, I think we have a link so that people can, Paul, ask you questions, right?
That's right, either by email or by phone, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions.
Let's come back, and we're going to talk about archaeology. Every time an archaeologist's spade makes it into the dirt, we have further confirmation of God's Word. So let's take a break. We'll continue that conversation right after these important messages.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about Medishare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With Medishare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with Medishare. And they actually like Medishare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of Medishare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder Medishare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again in studio with me, Dr. Paul Barreca, and again, Director of Fellowship International Mission. But I may also call upon you for just a minute as a pastor who has been in that situation for so long, because as we're talking about this area of archaeology, it sort of fits into what we call apologetics. And we say here at Point of View, we're helping you articulate a biblical point of view and also know how to defend a biblical worldview. But I do believe that in this kind of post-Christian culture, it's more essential than ever to know how to defend the Bible. And you don't have to know a lot about science. If you know anything about archaeology, this one, as we're going to give people tools for their apologetic toolbox, these are all pretty simple. But that's what I think the pastor should be equipping people in the church, don't you think?
Absolutely, Kerby. In my years of ministry, I kind of transitioned where in my early years of preaching, I would occasionally preach an apologetic sermon. I would talk about some point, whether it was the resurrection of Christ or creation or some other issue, and I would bring apologetics into that and give people equipment and resources that they could use. Perhaps the last 15 years of my pastoral ministry, of course, now I'm director of a mission agency. I don't preach as much or at least in one church all of the time. But when I was in a local church, every sermon had an apologetic emphasis. And I just want to encourage the pastors that are listening today that our people need that, and they need it for two reasons. The one reason is that there are people in our churches, and they're coming to church, and they're post-Christian in their background.
Right.
They are skeptical about the things that you're saying. They don't regard the Bible as a source of authority. And so when, as Christian pastors, as we just explain things and assume that because we've said, well, because we find it in John chapter 6, that means something. Well, to a post-Christian, that doesn't mean anything.
Yes.
And so we have to give some evidence behind those things. Not that we don't preach from the Scripture, but we preach a little bit more like Paul in Acts chapter 17, where he lays the foundation of what he's saying and then presents the truth. So the first reason is that there are people who are listening that need that information. But the second is that our church members are engaging people in their life and in their community and on their jobs and in their schools. And by giving apologetic answers and resources and references and books and articles and just even the arguments themselves, we're training and teaching our congregation how to give an answer and how to defend their faith. And believe me, they really will go back and be able to say something because they heard their preacher say it on Sunday morning in a sermon.
Yes. Well, again, let me just mention that one of the booklets we've been sending out, of course, we send them out on everything from Messianic prophecy, this one on archaeology, the most recent one is on drug abuse. And again, if you're not familiar with some of those, we do make available those to our listeners, if you'd like that. And one of the issues that I talk about in the book, and you have in the article that just came out, is that they've been actually looking at, if you will, some of the mortar between these bricks in the wall in Jerusalem, and they found some seals. Now, these seals are significant because one seal, for example, talked about governors, and that's really intriguing because if you go to 2 Kings chapter 23, 2 Chronicles chapter 18, it talks about governors in Jerusalem. So it's just another historical validation to what you see in the Old Testament.
Yeah, there's a reason they call it biblical archaeology, because, what other course of study, what other area of archaeology do you find a text in the Bible about a place and an event that happened, and then you go start and dig there,
yes,
and you find exactly what the Bible describes. And that's happened in the same context of those seals. One of those seals indicates the name of Isaiah the prophet.
I know, isn't that something?
And another in the very same, just a few meters away in this archaeological dig, they found, and this is all in to review for your audience who may not have caught that. This is the Bible Study magazine from Faith Life. It's connected to the Logos Bible software folks. But near that Isaiah seal, they found another seal with the name Hezekiah. And say, well, why is that important? Well, because Isaiah was the prophet to King Hezekiah, and it demonstrates these were in the area of the palace. And that demonstrates that Isaiah had access to the king and had access to the palace and was there. And, of course, now say, well, we have that in Scripture. But again, for the person that doesn't accept the validity of Scripture, here is archaeological evidence that demonstrates, obviously, that the Scriptures are inspired of God without fault, without errors in any way.
And again, some of you might say, well, this is coming pretty fast. How can I read that? Go to our website, pointofview.net. On the bottom there's a search engine. I just a minute ago typed in archaeology, and first popped up is my commentary on biblical archaeology, which talks about the top 10 discoveries that appeared in Christianity Today. And you say, well, I want to read the original article. Well, the next one is the 2018 discoveries in archaeology, the actual article from Christianity Today. And of course, then that doesn't even include the little booklet we're talking about. So sometimes people say, oh, I heard it said, but then I've got a skeptical son, daughter, niece, nephew, uncle, person I work with. How do I find some of that as well? And that's been kind of intriguing. And some of these archaeological discoveries have been totally unintended. One of the articles that came out last year is how ISIS accidentally corroborates the Bible. Now, that one, I've had everybody said, okay, you got to tell me. I spoke on that recently. He said, okay, how did ISIS accidentally corroborate the Bible? Well, it turns out that ISIS, when they took over Mosul, which is the ancient city of Nineveh, they dug through what was considered the Temple of Jonah. Now, whether it's the actual temple or the tomb, I don't know, but they assumed that it was the tomb of Jonah. And as they dug down, they came along to something else and found the Assyrian palace of King Esarhaddon. And as a result, then they found that as they looked through the chronologies and genealogies, everything recorded in the scriptures was just the way it was recorded right there. So even people that aren't doing archaeology sometimes have given us additional evidence of the historical accuracy of the scriptures.
Yeah, there's one story in Bible Study magazine of a Jewish archaeologist who was accused of by his Jewish friends of validating the Bible.
Yes.
And in the process of his archaeology, he became a believer because he realized that everything he had been taught in secular university about the Bible being untrustworthy and inauthentic and et cetera, everything he had been taught was wrong. He began to dig deeper, not only dig deeper in the dirt, but dig deeper into his heart. And he became a believer by the means of archaeology. So I just think that is just a very, very powerful demonstration of the apologetic nature of archaeology.
And again, mostly we've been using Old Testament examples, but when we go to Israel, we get some New Testament examples. First of all, Capernaum. I mean, we actually can see the foundation of the synagogue that Jesus preached in. Now, I think it was in the 4th century, they built one on top of it, but you can actually see what Capernaum looks like. You can see what is assumed to be Peter's house. You can see how close it was to the Sea of Galilee. You go into Jerusalem, you can see the pool of Bethesda, the pool of Siloam. You can see the temple steps that we preach on. So in some respects, you just, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, you just have some incredible archaeological finds in some cases, but in other cases, things that you can see if you go on one of these tours.
That's right. Now, we're in Capernaum. We're right next door to Bethsaida. Now, Bethsaida
Talk
is
about that.
different than Bethesda.
Yeah.
Bethesda is down in Jerusalem, but
Right.
Bethsaida is the community on the Sea of Galilee, and that's where Peter is from. And if you remember in Galatians chapter 2, Paul confronts Peter and says that to him that you, being a Jew, are encouraging the Gentiles to follow the Jewish law. But Peter himself was not following the Jewish law. And, well, that may sound interesting to us, but they discovered in doing some archaeological digs in Bethsaida along the Sea of Galilee that it's a rare exception. Most other Jewish communities, when they look at the food source for that community, they discover it 100% kosher. In Bethsaida, they discovered it only 97% kosher. What do you mean by that? Well, they discovered evidence that they were harvesting and using wild boar and catfish. And if you go back to Leviticus, you'll discover, of course, both of the wild boar, that's pretty obvious, but catfish as well is in the category of unclean foods. In Bethsaida, they were eating a certain amount of unclean foods. So it might sound strange that why in the world would Peter be eating unclean foods? He's in Israel, he's in Galilee, it's a very Jewish area, but in Bethsaida, there were those that were not following the kosher 100%. Maybe they just said, boy, I want a good cheeseburger or a good bacon and cheeseburger. And they were cheating on the kosher system.
Isn't that something?
That's right there. And perhaps Peter was a part of that. At least it gives evidence that Paul's confrontation of Peter is not off the wall.
Yes.
Indeed, it has archaeological proof even today.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll give you a few more archaeological finds. Maybe we'll start with the obvious one. The most significant find of the 20th century was the Dead Sea Scrolls, and get a chance to talk about that. And then I thought I'd spend just a minute talking about how we now have very good evidence that indeed Luke was a very accurate historian, and that matters because he not only wrote the Gospel of Luke, he wrote what? The Book of Acts. Mm-hmm. And we saw some of that even as the last trip took us to Greece. So just to give you a few more reasons why you should trust your Bible. I think you already do anyway, but we're giving you a lot more evidence, and that's something you can share with your non-Christian friends. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, Dr. Paul Barreca with us, and oftentimes we talk about evangelism and discipleship. We'll bring him back again, maybe to do that one, but we focused on the area of archaeology and also the tour of Israel. Might just mention as a program note, sitting in that chair just a week from today will be Joel Rosenberg. So he'll be talking about what's going on in Israel as well.
Oh, he's got great insights into Israel and Jordan as well.
Yes.
And I hope he can get to talk about some of those things. I'll be listening in.
I know you will be. Let's, if we can, for just a minute, talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls, because in a couple of ways that's significant, because we take the individuals, if they come on that tour, if they go on another tour to Qumran, they get to see where those were discovered. When we're in Jerusalem, we get to see the Isaiah scroll and some of those in the museum, and that is significant because that gives us an opportunity to look way back in history, since those are from like about 100 BC, and the oldest manuscripts we used to have for the Old Testament, 900 AD. So people wonder, do you have the telephone game? I mean, how accurate was the transmission? We found out it was very accurate, didn't we?
Extremely important archaeological discovery, discovered in 1943 when a Bedouin shepherd boy was throwing rocks into a cave and heard something crack, and there was some kind of strange sound, and went in to investigate and took what he discovered and brought it into town. And through a couple of iterations, someone that had some smarts looked at it and realized the significance of them. They ended up being, as you said earlier, Kirby, the most important archaeological discovery.
Yeah.
Because the Masoretic text, which was the earliest copies of the Masoretic text, which were written by Jewish scribes, goes back
Testament.
to 900 AD of the Old Testament. And they were very consistent. There was very few variations between different evidences or different manuscripts within the Masoretic text. And the reason was they were very meticulous in the way that they copied the text. If there were any errors, the entire text would be destroyed. They had different mechanics, such as counting the number of letters on a page and going to the middle letter, and if it didn't match up with the other copy, the copy would be destroyed, etc. So it was very careful text. But when you think about the last Old Testament book, the book of Malachi being written 400 years BC, that's a big gap. That's a 1,500-year gap or 1,300-year gap there. So when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, particularly in the book of Isaiah, and I think almost all of the Old Testament was recovered in one or more of the scrolls. The book of Esther was missing, and I think perhaps one other portion or one other book was missing as well. They discovered incredible accuracy with a text that came 1,300 years later, the Masoretic text. So the level of confidence in the text itself, the Hebrew text itself, was just became so much more profound. Not that we would doubt that. We know that it's God's word, and if God is going to give us his word, he's also going to preserve his word, and he certainly has done that through the ages, but he's also given us these confidence builders. And I think very, very strong arguments in the secular world that the Word of God is indeed something unique and different from every other book ever written in mankind.
And when we come to the New Testament, of course, the manuscripts are very close to the time in which they were written. But then the challenge wasn't that we don't have good transmission of it, but maybe the historical facts were wrong. And the person that oftentimes was criticized was Luke, because if you think about it, Luke is the historian who gives us the Gospel of Luke, but he also gives us the book of Acts. And in our archaeology booklet, I talk about this classical scholar who documents 84 different facts in the book of Acts that are confirmed by historical and archaeological details. But I'll tell a story that when you and I had our last trip, we went to Israel and Greece. I remember James, when we pulled up to Corinth, I'm seeing, okay, here's where the temple was. I can see all these structures, and he's taking us what's like down a goat path. I'm going, where are we going? All of it's over there. Well, then he takes us and shows us this particular place, which was by the theater, and it says Erastus. And that was uncovered, and it's something that you find in the book of Acts where it says Paul worked with Erastus, who was a very influential person in Corinth. And here they uncovered right there, really sort of on the pavement, the name of the individual that you find in the book of Acts. So wherever you go, it seems like, whether it's in Israel or even in Greece, we see just tremendous validation of the biblical text.
The same happened in Jerusalem as well, in the Pilate Stone.
Yes.
Here in Caesarea, when there was archaeological digs being done in Caesarea along by the Mediterranean Sea, the name of Pilate had not been found anywhere else in ancient literature. And that was a very, very strong point of contention with those that argued against the accuracy of the Bible. Well, you've got this person, and he's so important, and he's so influential, but he's only mentioned in the Bible. Therefore, the Bible must not be true. Until in, I believe it was the 1960s, we discovered in the, not we, but the Israeli archaeologists discovered at the Caesarea that this is indeed where Pilate was. His name is there. It's on a stone, and we're going to go to Caesarea. We're going to see a copy of that stone, but we're also going to be able to go to the Israeli Museum in Jerusalem and see the actual stone there that was moved there and is now in a protected environment in the Israeli Museum.
Now we find another Pontius Pilate in the ring. That was something that came out this last year. This ring had been discovered before, but now because of these advanced photographic techniques, they see the name Pontius Pilate on the ring. And it's not fancy enough probably to be worn by Pilate. It was probably worn by somebody who had the authority, because you know that in order to establish that indeed this was an edict from the Roman Empire, they would pour some wax on it, then put a signet ring on. And so this was somebody, no doubt, that had the authority under Pontius Pilate, who lost the ring over in this particular area. And now, because of some of the advanced archaeological techniques, we've been able to read the name Pontius Pilate on one of the rings.
That's right. And, you know, with tools and resources and websites and programs like Point of View, you don't have to be a Dallas Seminary scholar anymore to have access to this information. It really is there for all of us, regardless of how much Bible training we've had or how much access we have to biblical libraries and things like that. It's accessible for every believer right now. And, of course, if you're listening to this program, there's links to this information, and you can perhaps share that with someone who's a skeptic about the Bible. Well, did you know this? Or here's some information that demonstrates the unique nature of the Word of God.
Just before we end, of course, we have been talking about this trip to, in this case, Israel and Rome. We haven't talked about what happens in Rome, because there's an opportunity to go to the prison where Paul wrote the prison epistles. We have a chance to go to the catacombs. And that's something new that you and I know are looking forward to.
We sure are. We're going to be doing that, going to the catacombs, seeing the Colosseum, visiting some of the areas where we're fairly confident that Paul was. And much like in Jerusalem, some of these places have been There's been churches or things built up around them, shrines that have been built up to them. But seeing that actually there is very significant. I remember being in Sicily and seeing the place where Paul landed in Syracuse, and seeing the theater that was there, and the Roman hippodrome that was there as well. And you just see these things, and wow, it's just like living the Bible story, and just imagining what took place as Paul journeyed into Rome, as he was held there, and most likely was martyred there eventually by King Nero.
Well, we're going to get into a different topic next hour, but let me just mention that if you've just joined us, we spent some time in the first part of this hour talking about the trip that we are taking to Israel and Rome this time. It takes place in October, and if you'd like to know a little bit more about that, we have a banner on the website, pointofview.net, just says Go with Israel with Kerby. And also, if you look at some of the pictures we've posted below Paul Barreca's face and his bio, we have some of the previous trips. You can see a couple pictures from Greece and Rome in previous trips, and then also some other information about the itinerary, the cost, and the rest. And we'd love to have you go, but even if you cannot, we'll certainly bring back a report. And even as we have spent some time today talking about archaeology, we'll see if we can dig up a few more stories, figuratively, I hope, about these issues and address them again. So, Paul, thanks for being with us. You're in town just because you were speaking at Dallas Seminary, and I appreciate you coming in for this hour.
Great to be with you. Great to be talking to our Point of View listeners, and trust that it's been an encouraging hour for you, and stay tuned for the next hour.
Sue Bohlin and Paul will be in studio. Sue Bohlin will be in studio and Paul by phone, and we'll be getting into this issue of LGBT issues right after these important messages.
Here's some great news. If you missed the deadline to sign up for health insurance, or more importantly, if you sign up for a plan that you're just not happy with, you still have a choice. It's called MediShare, and MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing program. It's been around for 25 years. They have more than 400,000 members now around the country. And get this, over the years, MediShare members have shared more than $2 billion of each other's medical bills, so they could help share your needs too. And best of all, you could save a lot of money with MediShare. The typical savings for a family is around $500 a month. Your savings could be more or less, but think about what you could do with that extra money every month. So if you think you're stuck with a high-cost health plan that doesn't have much to offer, think again. You can join MediShare anytime, so call them today and check it out. There's no pressure. They're super easy to talk to. 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. This hour we're going to talk about a couple of issues related to, first of all, the LGBT issue, but not just homosexuality, but transgender. The other day you might remember that we talked about how you're seeing more and more of these biological males running in various events. In this particular case, Connecticut, finishing first and second. First in the girls' indoor record for the 300 meters, then the first and second for the 100-meter state outdoor championship. So there's all sorts of questions that people have about the transgender issue. But in addition to that, we've seen some people starting to talk about this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria as kind of the new social contagion. And we've posted an article about that you can read. And so to try to make sense of all of this, we bring back to the microphone Sue Bohlin, who is, of course, a good friend of ours and works with me at Probe Ministries, the website administrator, and an individual that has really done quite a lot of work over the years dealing with and ministering to women that have had same-sex attraction. So, Sue, I appreciate you joining me in studio.
It's a delight to be here, Kerby. Thank you.
And I might mention that one time we also were able to connect you up with Ann Polk, who now joins us by phone. And when I have these two smart women together, I just sit back and listen. But again, she's with Restored Hope. You have heard her, no doubt, on Focus on the Family and a variety of other different programs over the years. Author of Restoring Sexual Identity, Hope for Women Who Struggle with Same-Sex Attraction. Also the co-author of Love One Out. And just welcome back as well to Point of View.
Kerby, it's a delight to be with you. Thank you. And Sue, wonderful to hear your voice.
Thanks, Ann. Welcome. I'm so glad you're able to do this program with us today. It'll be good.
Absolutely delight.
Let's, if we can, maybe come to you, Ann, for just a minute. And I might just mention that if you find yourself saying, I really wish my kids would hear this, because they're really struggling with this whole gender identity issue. We have, on a number of occasions, talked about the Mind Games Camp, which is taking place in June. I'll go into some of that detail in just a minute. But, Sue, you're actually one of the people that speaks to these issues of gender and the fluidity of gender and the whole issue of transgenderism and all those kinds of things, because that's becoming kind of the hot topic on campus, isn't it?
That is one of the most solid presentations we make at Mind Games. Is what I call, the title of it is Grace and Truth on LGBT, because we need both compassion and biblical truth to give a balanced perspective. And so often the things that I'm sharing, the kids, the students who are there, haven't heard so much of it because they're immersed in the brine of the culture. They're only getting one side of the story. And after having spent 20 years in a ministry helping people deal with unwanted same-sex attraction, I've got stories, I've got heroes, I've got faces in my mind that I can share. And it's not just, okay, this is what the Bible says, which we make sure that they know, but these are the people that are dealing with this very real issue.
And again, we'll talk about the camp in just a little bit, but Ann, let me come to you, because with Sue, she's had a chance to minister to those individuals, but you have your own personal story, which you've talked about so many times on different radio programs, including this one. But we are kind of entering into a new era with this idea of rapid onset gender dysphoria, aren't we?
We surely are. The current culture really sees science as a secondary issue. Science is less important than how you feel or what you think at this particular moment. Unfortunately, for the youth, that's a really sad situation because the basics of understanding how male or female is composed and written into every single cell of the human body, from the brain to the skin cells. Essentially, everything contains the information that a person is male or female. And assigned at birth, meaning by a doctor, well, no. Jesus, the Lord God, knit each person together in their mother's womb, and he determined that a person be male or female. But that knowledge is being completely ignored. It is secondary news today to however someone might feel at the moment. And all the way through schools, early on in schools, public schools in various places, they're teaching the gingerbread man philosophy, that a person's body can be one thing, but the true gender is what's based upon feelings, etc. Where the Christian viewpoint is affirming of the biological determination that God created a person to be male or female. And yet kids are believing this secondary story mostly because they're not hearing the truth in an obvious way. I think we've dropped the ball on discipleship in some of the basic areas like sexuality and gender identity. Some things that were never questioned are now questioned every day. And unless the church answers those questions, it leaves the world to do so.
Sue, let me come to you for just a minute, because the article we've posted actually is referring to a previous article, which was entitled, When Your Daughter Defies Biology. Now, people will say, your name sounds familiar. That's because 2 days ago I had your husband on, who has a PhD in biology. So in some respects, what you're finding is these parents are saying, we have a daughter that's decided that maybe just because it's sort of trendy, that I'm going to get male hormones, I'm going to get some kind of sex reassignment surgery, and that's not going to be reversible. So a lot of it isn't based upon even a long-term feeling. It's a momentary feeling, or as they call it, a social contagion.
I am so glad that Anne pointed out that science is taking a back seat to feelings, because objective reality people don't want the objective reality to crash into how they feel and how they think, which is changeable. This whole idea of social contagion among junior high girls, especially boys too, but it's mainly girls, is things catch on like wildfire. You know, years ago it was eating disorders, and then an epidemic of cutting, and it's like when my friend does it, it's cool, and suddenly she's getting coolness points. I want to get coolness points as well.
Yes.
There's a lot driving what's going on there rather than what's truly happening, which is a thinking disorder. And it's scary when parents are so quick to jump on the support my transgender kid bandwagon, thinking this is how I'm going to love my child, because I've been scared to death that if I don't give in to what my child is demanding this moment, then they're going to commit suicide. They use the suicide threat as a manipulative tool. And that's way scary, because the truth is that once people have gone through the transition to try to become the opposite sex, which they never can, as Anne pointed out, our gender is stamped on every cell of our body. They're up almost 20 times more likely to commit suicide within 20 years. So this is a very, very scary situation.
We're going to take a break, and we have a lot more to cover. This may be one of those topics, though, you'd like to ask some questions, and we couldn't do any better than having Sue Bohlin in studio and Ann Paulk by phone. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Going to spend our time talking about homosexuality, transgenderism, and all of those issues right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when the U.S. debt officially reached $20 trillion, some listeners ask who owns this debt. In the past, we were assured that the national debt wasn't a big deal since we owe it to ourselves. I never thought that comment was very reassuring then, and it simply isn't true now. The U.S. borrows heavily from foreign countries, especially the Chinese, and this creates the first problem: foreign influence. One former member of Congress put it this way: whoever pays the piper gets to call the tune. Foreign leaders aren't inclined to whistle Yankee Doodle. Another problem is that these countries are not an infinite source of credit. They have their own economies to deal with and will probably want to put their investments closer to home, especially as they look at the current congressional spending spree. Are we approaching a time when America's excessive borrowing makes us a bad credit risk? Sometimes the U.S. looks like some of the citizens who have maxed out their credit cards and have nowhere else to turn. The amount some of these countries hold in American debt is staggering. The U.S. government owes China $1.1 trillion. Saudi Arabia probably has about $700 billion in assets. A number of years ago, they threatened to sell that much off when Barack Obama was president. These countries that have been lending America money may not wish to invest any more in America and might even decide to withdraw their current investments. In previous commentaries, I've warned about the possibility that these foreign investors may simply decide to cash in their treasury bills and invest them closer to home. If our creditors cut us off, our treasury securities could reach junk bond status. The lesson here is simple. Before you spend the money, you need to know where it's coming from. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Thinking Man Films, Patterns of Evidence, The Moses Controversy. Did Moses write the first books of the Bible? Patterns of Evidence in theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again in studio with us, Sue Bohlin, and by phone, Ann Paulk. And Ann, I'd like to come for you for just a minute. I sort of alluded to your testimony, but it'd probably be good to share that. I know that many of our listeners are familiar with your story, but if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing some of that for our newer listeners or people that aren't familiar, because it kind of sets the scene for what we're going to be talking about in terms of whether gender and sexual orientation are changeable, fluid, and all the questions that are surfacing right now. So would you mind kind of sharing a little bit of your story?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking. I grew up with, I'd been molested at age 4, and the outcome of that was I felt I was vulnerable, and I just felt insecure. I felt very vulnerable to potentially being abused again. And so overnight, my mom noticed and thought it was related to my grandfather dying, beloved grandfather, that I had a change and became an overnight tomboy. And I call that tomboy with a purpose, because sometimes girls, they hide their femininity for a reason. There are reasons for that. And for me, at that young age, not even knowing how to tell time, I certainly was very vulnerable and taken advantage of by the adult male. So over time, that ended up being throwing off my femininity and then seeking it once again through relationship with other gals. And what I wasn't comfortable with in and of myself, I was able to love or show affection to outside of my own body with somebody else. So my insecurity showed up that way. So going through 4th, 5th grade, those feelings emerged and continued on until college, at which time I decided I was going to embrace the homosexual world and seek to find a partner and go to the bars and hang out with the gay crowds on campus. I was at a very liberal University of California campus, their party school, actually. And it was there that I embraced all of this, including going to counseling on campus. But amazingly, instead of feeling more and more comfortable about myself, I felt less and less. It was as if the bottom had fallen off the plane and everybody was sitting in the air. That's how I was feeling about my life. There was no reason to say no to things. There was no reason when I threw God out of the picture to have any source of real stability. And everything was open at that point. So as my life began spinning out of control and I felt less and less secure over time, I began having dreams about Jesus, and that's what really changed everything.
Wow.
I was involved with, a Jewish roommate was my dear friend, not a partner, but a friend, and hanging out with all of her friends. And I thought Judaism looked really great because of the camaraderie and the family feel to it. And I thought, wow, this looks really appealing. Well, one time I would go to a dorm, the Commons, and I'm about to have a meal, and one of the gals makes this huge crack about Jesus, and I get all defensive, and I'm like, what is wrong with me? I already threw God out. What? Huh? So that caused me to wonder. And then a series of other events like that until eventually I cried out to God and said, okay, whoever you really are, what I'm looking for is love. I'm looking for affection. I'm looking for real love. And if anything else gets in the way, then, I don't want that to happen. And I hope you're not the Christian God, because I still want to be gay. So in the middle of all that, God reached his hand through time into my world and began aligning my life with all the things that I had laid out as a fleece. Okay, well, if you are the Christian God, then here's A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And he did them all. He just went right through my list. I mean, he sped through it. And he began to woo my heart and win it. And I went to a campus group on campus and was trying to find out more about Jesus. And they answered so many of the questions, the reality of good and evil, and why is that significant? Why does that point to the gospel? Well, it does, in a profound way. And eventually, the final night, we were bowing our heads and praying. It was a Baptist student group on campus, and I pretended to fit like everybody else, to be one of them. And I sensed that God was in the room, that God was actually there, weaving in and out amongst the prayers of the saints in that room, and that there was a cookie cutter hole where I was. So I went and told the pastor that afterwards. God just revealed it to me. I mean, it was like a Saul experience, right? Here he was reaching into my crazy world that had no boundaries, no reason for boundaries, no well-being. And he began to provide, here's truth, I am real, and I'm not in your life. Do you want this? And I did. That night I couldn't hold back. I prayed and asked Jesus to forgive me all of my sins, of which I had many, and to come into my life and be Lord and Savior of it. And I was lit on fire. My eyes were full of joy. Peace overshadowed my life for the first time ever. I had an encounter with the Holy God, and he was willing to redeem someone such as me. And that began my journey out of homosexuality. So at that point, I surrendered my life, but I needed help. And so I got help through a local counselor. I also got help through a former Exodus ministry, still dear friends of mine, the Worthens. And they simply discipled me. They provided what I needed to grow. They tilled the soil and enabled me to thrive as a woman. And eventually I realized that I fit amongst other women, and that's not really very interesting, sexually speaking, that I actually fit as a woman amongst women, which really desexualized gals. And I began realizing that men were really different and fascinating. And that's what led me towards a real heart change. I mean, all those things were putting water in the cup, filling my cup, filling my cup, filling my cup, until eventually I became more of a whole individual and was able to connect with essentially going through puberty at, 25? So it was this amazing thing. And then it's not been altogether easy since. I got married and have 3 sons whom I adore and love, and I'm so proud to be their mom. But my husband returned to the gay life, and that left a huge void. That was really hard.
Yes.
But I choose not to go back to the gay life. I have no desire to go back to it. And, it's about walking with Jesus. He has the words of life. He's the sustainer of life. He's the creator of life. And he's my husband. He's my Lord. And I'm so grateful to belong to him and not be walking in sin and darkness.
And I am so glad that you brought in the discipleship element, because it's front and center in terms of how people experience change as you have. And that's why there's such a brouhaha going on against quote-unquote conversion therapy, when so many of the ministries aren't doing conversion therapy at all. They're just discipling people and pointing them to Jesus and allowing spiritual growth to happen, which allows emotional growth to happen, which allows hearts to heal, and things change. It's the nature of the gospel to change us and to transform us more into the image of Christ. So I so appreciate that element of your testimony that points to the discipleship element, because it's huge in terms of understanding how it is that people can come out of homosexuality and stay out of homosexuality. And it doesn't mean that you're never tempted again. It means you choose Jesus over the flesh.
That's right. And conversion therapy, by the way, is kind of a mishmash term. It has nothing to do with Christianity or spiritual perspective. It's all about, it's trying to vilify or malign the work of God in people's lives by using that phrase. And what they're trying to do is combine the idea that you walk up to somebody who has a big light switch on their chest. One part says gay, one says straight, and you switch it as if you are imposing something on someone else, and that there's a light switch on someone's chest. I mean, it's really kind of ridiculous, right?
Yes.
Therapists don't identify with it. Christians don't identify with it. Conversion therapy is also the kitchen sink that they throw every potential abuse practice into. So we don't need laws banning, but they also throw into that discipleship and compassionate counseling.
Let me jump in real quick, because we have to take a break, but I just wanted to mention that if people want to connect up with you, first of all, we have the restoredhopenetwork.org, and that's on the website. And when we come back, Sue, I also wanted to talk about the Mind Games Camp, because, you've worked with Living Hope, and some people listening right now might say, I really wish my son, my daughter, my niece, my nephew, my grandson, my granddaughter would hear some of this. Well, we have a camp where we get into those kinds of issues. So we'll talk about that. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have Ann Paulk by phone and Sue Bohlin in studio. We'll be right back.
Question: do you have a health insurance plan you are not happy with? Well, Bethany and Jason thought they were stuck. Their plan just kept getting more expensive, and Bethany's favorite doctor didn't even take that plan anymore. And then some friends at church told them about MediShare.
With our previous insurance, we were paying $1,200 a month. With MediShare, we now pay around $600 a month.
Yes, they're paying $600 less per month, and that's a pretty typical savings with MediShare. And they actually like MediShare more.
I was able to go back to my original doctor that I absolutely loved, and it's just been an absolutely beautiful thing being a part of MediShare.
Yeah, so they pay a lot less and they like it more. No wonder MediShare is growing so fast. Find out more. They're super easy to talk to. All you have to do is call 855-90-BIBLE. That's 855-90-BIBLE. 855-90-BIBLE.
It takes a team to win. Be part of Point of View's Truth Team and bring truth and healing to America. Go to pointofview.net/team, pointofview.net/team, and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue conversation in studio today with Sue Bohlin, as well as by phone with Ann Pauck. But let me for just a minute talk about the Mind Games Camp. This is something we've promoted every year. Just a couple of days ago, we, of course, had Ray Bohlin on talking about some of these issues. But when we come to the Mind Games Camp, which takes place June 16th to June 22nd, it is a week-long camp, and there are all sorts of topics from campus Christianity and origins and the whole question about good and evil and is Jesus the only Savior. But one of the things that you spend some time, Sue, talking about is grace and truth about LGBT, as well as the difference between guys and girls. And I think we've moved from a time in which those were kind of nice to know about to mandatory. I mean, I remember when we first had things on homosexuality, nobody would come to it. And then we'd say, help my roommate is gay. Then they would come to it. Well, now we've gone from a time in which these were maybe optional to mandatory, because no matter whether your child is in public school, Christian school, even homeschool, they have friends that say that they are gay. And they are really, in many cases, being seduced by some of those ideas. And they really need to learn the kinds of things that you cover in that week, don't they?
Absolutely. And that's why I love the balanced perspective of grace and truth, because they're longing to hear a compassionate response that honors the friendships that they have with truly wonderful people. But they also need to know that this is not God's design for human sexuality, and that God has these rules in place because he loves us, because he wants what's best for us, and he knows what will cause the thriving of humanity. People need to know that. They also need to know that God cares very deeply about the bruised and smoldering wick he will not put out, and he cares about hurting people. And there's always comorbidities of depression and anxiety, and often suicidality in those that struggle with same-sex attraction or gender dysphoria, as we're talking about today. There's so many things going that are not right in the souls of people, and we need to be full of compassion while at the same time pointing a light to Jesus and to his truth. And so providing a balanced perspective is one of the things that I'm privileged to do. Let me also say, as we're talking about mind games, Kerby, that one of the lectures that ends up being very powerful every year is that one of our staff will present the philosophical explanation for why does a good God allow pain and evil and suffering. And then I immediately follow that up with a very practical message called the value of suffering, because I've lived my entire life with a disability. I'm one of the last people to get polio before the vaccine was developed. We buried our first child. And I know something about pain and suffering, and I've seen God use it really big in my life. And so I bring to the table very specific and practical ways in which God honors the heart of the suffering people and can use it for good. And that ends up being one of the most memorable sessions that we have. So we're laying a foundation of worldview. We move into apologetics, and then we start getting real practical and with things that, like you say, are it's not a nice to know situation, it's need to know, to equip people to think biblically for the long term, for the rest of their lives, and to believe that Christianity is true. And here's why.
Might just mention you can go to probe.org/mindgames, or of course we have these brochures which we make available to anybody. And one of the things I might also say to parents is saying, well, I think we're good with this. What I found is that these kids that are Christians are living double lives. They know that they say, and matter of fact, when you get honest with some of these kids, they say, well, I don't see any reason why two individuals that love each other, even if they're the same sex, couldn't get married. I don't see why homosexuality is a big deal. But they don't raise that at home.
Nope.
They don't raise that in a small group. And you've had some pretty interesting conversations when you've provided a safe place where they can really surface some of their questions or even some of their objections.
Yeah, that's right. And one of our favorite parts is we've got a box that is labeled Ask Box. Instead of an X box, it's an Ask Box, and they can submit questions and their doubts anonymously. We don't know anybody's handwriting. And so they put their questions in a box, and we promise we will answer every single question that you submit. And since we have a limit of 40 people, 40 campers, everybody gets to know each other. So it's very relational, it's a wonderful place to connect. But you don't get lost in the shuffle. And so it's a great way to either ask us individually as instructors, and we eat all of our meals with the students. We're not off in some little enclave. Or they can ask their questions and express their doubts anonymously, and we respect them. We tell them there is no question that you can ask us that is off the table. We're not afraid of anything you bring. We're not afraid of your doubts. We're not afraid of your questions. And you're probably not going to ask anything we haven't heard before.
So again, June 16th to 22nd. And if you'd like some more information, of course, it's very inexpensive, and there's even scholarships, and we'll mention some more about that in just a minute. But Ann, I wanted to come to you because you may have seen this, but Ryan Anderson, who's also been on the program, put together a symposium at the Heritage Foundation with a number of sort of, if you will, gay activists who themselves are saying, this transgender thing's going the wrong direction, because the argument has always been you were born gay, once homosexual, once gay, always gay. And now the transgender movement and the rapid onset gender dysphoria is starting to rattle those cages. Are you familiar with some of the concerns that are even coming from the homosexual movement about the transgender movement?
Well, yes, I am. And, historically speaking, the T was simply added on to the letter alphabet, but it wasn't necessarily a convenient fit for most of the people in the gay and lesbian community. So that historically is going in, but the activism has really overtaken the whole movement and the argument for immutability. And in fact, they're arguing the opposite, and often in the same bills that are submitted to different states. Currently, 5 states are have bills submitted to ban conversion therapy, which usually includes statements like, a person is born gay, therefore they should be allowed to, or should be encouraged and only encouraged to affirm homosexuality. But the body, the fluidity of the body and gender identity, and then so they have these two contrasting views all in the same bill, and it really is not a cohesive worldview. So either people can change or they cannot change. And it's an interesting philosophy. It even overran, as we know, Martina Navratilova.
Yes, there you go.
Who said this is unfair for a man to play against teen or girls in tennis, and of course he's going to win. He has bigger bone structure, larger muscle mass, probably faster. I forget the name of the muscle type, but anyway, there's a fast muscle mass.
Twitches,
and
yeah.
a slower,
Fast twitch, yeah.
Fast twitch. That's
Fast twitch
right.
special.
Oh, thank you. Good job. That was back from my college days when I was trying to recall it. But fast twitch muscle mass versus slow twitch, and women generally have more slow twitch than men who have fast twitch muscles. So it's a very interesting situation now where the gay and lesbian activists are being absolutely overrun by the transgender movement. But there's been a claim by the Lesbian Front. It's a lesbian feminist group who filed complaints to Twitter, Google, and a whole bunch of other groups saying that gay males are leading this way into the transgender movement, and that they are forcing situations that put women's lives at risk, and
there you go. Yes,
homeless or situations where abused women are, and now there's a man in there who knows. All he has to do is claim to be a woman, and he's allowed into the women's shelter. And that's happening in prisons now and all sorts of other things. So it's very dangerous and not safe for the women, and the protections are being removed. So, yes, even the gay and lesbian activists are saying this is too far. This is gone
Isn't that
way
something?
too far.
Yeah. We posted just the other day this piece by Rich Lowry, and the subtitle is "Everyone is Supposed to Ignore the Madness," because, Sue, you and I have talked about off air, but let me just mention that I'll just use the state of Connecticut since I've lived in Connecticut in the past. You have these two biological males that have been winning all these races, the 55-meter dash. They won the 300-meter dash, the 100-meter outdoor championships, and it's very obvious that in a short amount of time, every one of the track records for the women will be owned by these two men who now call themselves women.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets back to what Ann was talking about. Testosterone basically gives you all sorts of benefits. It makes men bigger, stronger, faster, more muscle mass, have bigger hearts. Physically, not necessarily metaphorically, of course. Greater, lung capacity and all the rest. And when you start looking at this, you can see where it's going to go. And again, it's just part of this. You just have to ignore the madness. Well, at Point of View, we're not going to ignore the madness. We'll come back and talk more about that right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Donna Dunbar and her husband Clarence love to serve their community in Port Charlotte, Florida. They founded a soup kitchen at which they donated over 4,000 volunteer service hours, an act that won them the President's Volunteer Service Award. But things aren't as rosy at their condominium. Donna is a lay minister in the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. She welcomes a few of her friends to the social room at her condo each week for a Bible study. The room is used by lots of people. Some play games there. There's a weekly poker game and even a regular movie night for all to attend. Until recently, Donna's Bible study was no big deal. But without any announcement or warning, the Condo Association Board adopted a resolution putting an end to the use of the common areas of the condo for religious purposes, including Donna's Bible study. Someone even put a sign on the organ in the room that said, "Any and all Christian music is banned." First Liberty Institute filed a complaint with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development alleging that Donna's condo broke the law with such a discriminatory policy and asking Secretary Ben Carson to undertake an investigation into the matter. After all, such unequal treatment of citizens shows hostility to religion and violates federal law and the First Amendment. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again for just a few more minutes. We have Sue Bohlin in studio and Ann Palk on the phone. And I thought I'd just mention for a few minutes some of these resources on the website. If you go to probe.org, Sue, I see one of your articles, How Bad is This Conversion Therapy Thing? I love that.
Yeah.
And so if you wanted to know about the Mind Games Camp, you wanted to read some of those articles, those are all available at probe.org, right?
Mm-hmm. right on the homepage.
And so, again, those are available. And let's talk about your website, restoredhopenetwork.org, declaring life transformation in Jesus Christ. And I love the cut line there. As such were some of you, 1 Corinthians 6. So talk about what's
That's
available
right.
on the website, because it does seem to me that there's just some great resources that our listeners would benefit by going to your website.
Well, thank you, Kerby. And I'm so delighted to hear that you're doing the Mind Games Camp, Sue, and also Kerby and everybody else. So that sounds fantastic, by the way.
Thanks. You know what? It's only 1 week instead of 2 up in Summit, in Colorado, where you are. So
yeah,
we like that.
Oh, good. Well, it's fantastic. I love it.
Thanks.
On the website, Restored Hope Network, you can find all sorts of information. We have a little discussion about what is conversion therapy and do we do it? No, we don't. It's an ideological term, by the way, that was crafted by the GLBT activist movement. It is not a practice of any kind. So it's an interesting story. You might want to look at that, restoredhopenetwork.org, under the About. We have 50 ministries across the U.S. that provide care for those who are dealing with unwanted same-sex attraction or wanting to align with their body, that they're struggling. So we have support and discipleship mentoring through that resource as well as many links to articles. A couple of the topics that you've referred to here, some of the original material is on our website, also linked. Lisa Littman's study about rapid onset gender dysphoria, where she is essentially exposed from Brown University the fact that a lot of teen girls are really coming up against this and are trying to fit in and get kudos through identifying with their transgender friend. They have situations where 4 out of 4 teen girls in a group, just because one becomes transgender identifying, all 4 end up going that direction because otherwise they're put out of the group. So, I mean, it's a messy situation. But if you want to read some of those resources, some of the great information that's available out on the web, we do have links to that under resources, ways to connect with people, great curriculums and materials. We have an annual conference coming up right during Mind Games Camp called Hope 2019. And happily going to have June Hunt and Alex McFarland doing apologetics.
Great.
We have Julie Slattery bringing a counseling perspective as well, and Phil Corson from a Reformed theology perspective going to set the stage for transformation. And so terrific time, very special time hearing personal testimony and connecting with one another. So anyhow, a few things going on.
Well, again, Hope Conference, in your case, June 21st and 22nd. We have listeners up in the Minneapolis area, so you can just drive to that, but people anywhere around the country can find out a little bit more. You've got a little video there that's a promotion from last year's conference. It's just a little less than a minute long, so you can watch that and pass it on. But I thought I'd go around the round table real quick, and there are listeners, Sue, that are maybe in positions of authority. They may be a pastor, a Bible fellowship leader, a small group leader, and they're saying, I'm not sure I know what to say about this gender stuff. But if you don't speak to that issue, you have young people and even adults that are confused about this issue. So are there resources on the website that would help them craft a message of both grace and truth?
I sure hope so. Actually, we have an entire section at probe.org on faith and sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I've written most of it, which has all been informed from a redemptive perspective because of the people that I've had the privilege of serving alongside. And so, there are great resources there for thinking biblically and compassionately about this issue. And if the church doesn't address it, the world's very unbiblical perspective is going to win the day. I wanted to bring up, Kerby, something that happened last week. I got a call from someone on staff at our church saying that a mom had come to her saying, my 19-year-old college son is saying, I'm thinking about becoming a girl. And how do I talk to him? What do I say? Where do we go with this? And so I prayed about it for a while, and I said, I need to give you some questions to ask, in addition to some, it's important to read what you can just to give a good understanding. But I thought I would share the questions that that I suggested to this mom that she could bring up to the son. First of all, how did you come to this conclusion, which is a basic critical thinking question that anybody should be thinking about. Secondly, what is your understanding of what it means to be male or female? So you've got a 19-year-old boy who says, I think I'm a girl. Well, how would you know what it is to be a girl? What does that mean? How would you know what it feels like to be a girl? Tell me about what it's like to get your period. Talk to me about that. The reality is he doesn't have any idea. The third question is, what problems in your life will be solved, do you think, by changing your gender? And the reality is you truly can't change your gender because every cell in your body is stamped XX or XY. You can't change your pelvic structure, which means that even if you cut off body parts, because of the pelvic structure and the bone structure, you're always going to walk like the gender that God made you. There may be some adjustments, but you're not going to be able to fool everybody. And then finally, where is God and how you're processing the situation? And the reality is so often people are either saying, I'm leaving him out of it, or I begged him to change me from a girl into a boy or a boy into a girl, and he doesn't do it, so I've got to fix it. God made a mistake, so I've got to clean up the mess. And so they're angry that God has not answered their prayers to either change my feelings or change my body. And so those are some questions that I think are helpful to put on the table in terms of helping people think through this issue. It's a thinking disorder. It is not a body disorder. It is not a gender disorder. It is a thinking problem.
Well, very good. We're just about out of time, but let me mention again that you might just say, I've got a lot of other questions. We've run out of time. So again, we have a link to Restored Hope Network. Some of you might want to go to the Hope Conference. If you know a young person, and it could be your child, your grandchild, niece, nephew, but it may be just somebody else that you know whose child would benefit from the Mind Games Conference, get some of that material, or simply go to probe.org/mindgames, taking place June 16th to the 22nd. And we want to provide as much of those resources to you as possible. Might mention one other. Sometimes pastors are dealing with the gay theologians arguments, and so we have a little booklet here on homosexual theology, how to respond to some of those arguments as well. And so those are all resources we make available on the website. So, Ann, thank you for sharing your testimony today, and thank you for joining us here on Point of View.
What a delight. Thank you so much for having me.
And Sue, thanks for being here as well. Look forward to getting some of the listeners to get their kids to the next Mind Games Conference.
I will welcome them personally.
Well, that's all we have for today. Tomorrow is our opportunity to look at these issues in a little more detail on our Friday weekend edition. So I hope that you will take the time to join us then. If you find yourself saying, I want to read some of these articles, guess what? They're all on the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
From Thinking Man Films and Fathom Events comes Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. A new documentary follows investigative filmmaker Timothy Mahoney's faith-affirming journey throughout the Middle East in search of scientific evidence that Moses wrote the first books of the Bible.
The Lord said to Moses, write this in a book.
Patterns of Evidence, the Moses Controversy. In theaters March 14th, 16th, and 19th only. More information is available at patternsofevidence.com/Moses.
Is there a lot of free time in your schedule? Probably not. Most of us are on the go all the time, and Point of View is ready to go with you no matter where on the go is. Visit the App Store for your phone or tablet and search for Point of View Radio. Our app lets you listen or watch anytime it's convenient for you. And since we're told to be doers, not just listeners, the app provides a quick way to take action on the issues we're talking about. You can send us a question, find a local radio station, read articles, listen and share Kerby's viewpoints, commentaries. It's a lot of impact in one little free app. Visit the App Store today, right now, and download the Point of View Radio app. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.